This video contains flashing lights and colors.
Throughout history, several theme park owners have sought to cater to the teenage and young adult demographics with high-intensity thrill rides. But what happens when a theme park does more than just add thrill rides to their lineup? What happens when their marketing department goes completely unhinged? Well, in the case of England's Thorpe Park, you get everything from naked roller coaster riders to literal pissing contests. But how and why did such a large-scale theme park go completely over the top? Let's dive into the bizarre Thorpe Park rabbit hole right here on Theme Park Crazy. Now, if you live on my side of the Atlantic, you may be wondering what exactly Thorpe Park is. So here is a bit of brief background. Thorpe Park was created by RMC. No, not that RMC. This RMC stood for Ready Mixed Concrete. From 1941 to 1970, the land Thorpe Park currently sits on used to be a gravel pit. This is an area where gravel is mined until it runs out. Due to public concern about the land becoming useless and barren once the gravel was mined, RMC decided to try and repurpose the old site once the gravel ran out. Specifically, their plan was to turn the depleted quarry into a leisure park. They did this by forming a new subsidiary, Leisure Sport Limited, and flooding the gravel pit so that it could be used as a lake. In 1975, the Water Skiing World Championships were held on the lake, and 4 years later, the leisure park surrounding it would open to the public. Now, the Thorpe Park that opened back then was a way different place than the Thorpe Park that exists today. For the most part, it was an educational heritage park centered on British history. Its main attraction was Thorpe Park Lake, but it also had exhibits like a replica cave from the Stone Age and a Celtic farm. The 1980s would introduce themed rides and attractions, including the now-defunct Loggers Leap log flume and Space Station Zero, the park's first roller coaster. This mild family coaster was originally built indoors and later relocated to an outdoor location and rethemed to what is now known as the Flying Fish. Attractions like this were what defined the park through the 1980s, as its target market was families with young children. There was even a group of talking cartoon animal mascots named the Thorpe Park Rangers. As for its advertising, it was about as wholesome and family-friendly as it got.
So you want to be a Thorpe Park Ranger, kid?
Yes, please, Mr. Ranger.
When you meet the Thorpe Park Rangers, you won't believe the fun. But we're here to help arrange is a fortnight's fun in one. In one day we can deliver Treasure Isle and Thunder River. All the sights and all the shows, a teacup ride and train that goes. When you meet the Thorpe Park Rangers, it's a fortnight's fun.
Up the M25 at junctions 11 or 13.
Throughout the 80s and 90s, Thorpe Park was largely seen as a fun-for-all-ages kind of place under RMC's leadership. All of that, however, would change in 1998. That was the year that the Tussauds Group would purchase the park from RMC. Yes, the same Tussauds Group famous for the Madame Tussauds wax museums. At the time, the Tussauds Group already owned two of the UK's biggest theme parks, Alton Towers and the nearby Chussington World of Adventures. Now for Chussington, it was another family-focused park, and it was located less than 30 minutes away from Thorpe Park. Tussauds knew that having two parks so close together chasing essentially the same audience risked cannibalizing their own market. But they knew this very well. They bought Thorpe Park to get rid of their local competition, and they were about to transform it into something completely different. Chussington would remain the more family-oriented destination, while Thorpe Park would be transformed into a park primarily aimed at teenagers and young adults. To enact this transformation, Tussauds would need some pretty big investments in the thrill ride department. These major investments started with the Shoot the Chutes water ride Tidal Wave in 2000, followed by the Spinning Flat Ride Vortex and the Drop Tower Detonator in 2001. These were followed by the park's first major thrill coaster in 2002. This coaster, named Colossus, was built by Swiss manufacturer Intamin. It was notable for being the first roller coaster in history to feature 10 inversions. At a cost of £13.5 million, this was the park's largest single investment at the time. When it came to promotion, Tussauds decided to go all out with a surreal marketing campaign. On television, viewers were treated to an advert that played more like an early 2000s anti-drug PSA than a roller coaster ad. Check this out.
10 looping roller coaster. Colossus. It never leaves you. Thorpe Park.
This ad was absolutely genius. It fully got across the ride's record-breaking disorientation, and it had some pretty great cinematography too. Colossus ended up being a huge hit for the park, with annual attendance said to increase by 250,000 guests. In the face of this new coaster's success, Tussauds was far from finished with their investment plan. The same year Colossus opened, construction began for the park's next project, Nemesis Inferno. Built by Swiss manufacturer Bodily, the company had previously built the critically acclaimed Nemesis at Tussauds Alton Towers. This new project would serve as a spiritual successor to that attraction. Themed to an erupting volcano, this coaster would have a Shadow the Hedgehog-esque edgy color scheme of red and black. But even more edgier than the color scheme was the promotion. Now here's where things start to get disturbing. Officials hired the same ad agency who worked on the Colossus advert, but instead of a cool concept that got the ride's point across, this one was focused on, well, hot feet.
Feel the heat of Nemesis Inferno, now at Thorpe Park.
Now, the emphasis on feet is arguably understandable. After all, this is an inverted coaster where your feet dangle. But did we really need to see the skin melting off someone's bare feet? Well, speaking of skin, there was another promotional event involving this coaster the very next year. In May 2004, Thorpe Park was the site of a charity event that took place on Nemesis Inferno. This event saw participants attempt to break a Guinness World Record. And what was that record? Well, the record for the most naked people on a roller coaster. Yes, on May 21, 2004, 81 students from 15 different British universities rode the coaster in their birthday suits. Even crazier, the weather that day was cold and cloudy, with a high of only 59.5 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 15 degrees Celsius. Nevertheless, tens of thousands of pounds were said to be raised for raising and giving student charity committees. Participants were said to have a ton of fun. Lee Harkness of the University of Surrey called it brilliant, amazing, good fun. 47-year-old Judy Booker said, "I've got two phobias, the fear of roller coasters and taking my clothes off in public, so that gets two things in one go." Finally, 20-year-old criminology student Sally Taylor said, "I've told my mom I'm coming here, but I didn't tell her I would be naked." Notable coaster enthusiast David J. Ellis also took part in the event. According to him, the seats were covered in disposable polythene covers for this event. So in case you were wondering about the seats, no worries, because they stayed sanitary. 3 years after Nemesis Inferno, the park would install its next major roller coaster. This time, Intamin was brought back to install one of their accelerator models. This launch coaster would take guests from 0 to 80 miles per hour in just 1.8 seconds, making it the fastest coaster in Europe and giving it one of the fastest roller coaster accelerations of all time. The force of the acceleration was an undeniable burst of adrenaline and anxiety to boot. So what did Thorpe Park do to calm the nerves of the first test riders? Well, naturally, they brought in a local priest to bless the coaster. Yes, the vicar of Surrey's St. Mary's Church, Father Michael Hereward Rothwell, was brought to bless the coaster and its first riders with holy water. This was a truly surreal sight, and what's even more surreal is what eventually happened to the priest. Years later, Hereward Rothwell was reportedly accused of fabricating some of his personal and biographical details, though the full details of the allegations were never revealed. Moving on, Stealth didn't only receive a blessing from a member of the clergy, but the blessing of a corporate sponsor too. A few years after the ride opened, it was officially sponsored by Nestle's Yorkie bar. This bar was considered by many to be the world's only openly sexist chocolate bar. Now you might be wondering how the hell a chocolate bar can be sexist. Well, I'll explain. Back in 1976, Eric Nicoli, who worked for a confectionery company called Roundtree, noticed a gap in the candy market. He felt that the popular Cadbury Dairy Milk bar was too thin and that there was a market out there for a thicker chocolate bar. To fill this gap, he helped develop two new chocolate bars, the Lion and the Yorkie, both of which were much thicker than the Dairy Milk. Moreover, while the Dairy Milk bars were mainly marketed towards women, the Yorkie's marketing was geared towards men, with their ads featuring truck drivers and construction workers. Now, the openly sexist part wouldn't happen until Nestle, who acquired Roundtree in the 80s, introduced a new marketing strategy for the candy bar. This multi-million-pound advertising campaign sought to, quote, reclaim chocolate for men. The bars were redesigned to feature a women's restroom symbol crossed out by a no symbol. The wrapper actually had "It's not for girls" written on it. Print ads included taglines like "Not available in pink," "Save your money for driving lessons," "King size, not queen size," and "You got the vote, be happy with that." But these were just posters. At least they didn't have TV commercials where women would try to get a taste of the chocolate bar by putting on disguises like the Trix Rabbit, except they absolutely did that.
Yorkie, please, mate.
Oh, you want a Yorkie, do you?
Yeah.
You're not a bird by any chance.
You having a laugh?
Explain the offside rule then.
A player cannot be in an advanced position of the opponent's last defender when the ball is played.
Open that. What kind of flowers are these?
Purple?
Funny?
Yeah.
Stockings are tight.
Stockings.
Oh look! A big hairy spider! You know, that wrapper really brings out the beautiful blue of your eyes.
Really?
Yorkie, 5 big masculine chunks of chocolate. It's not for girls.
Nestle even went as far as to have promotional events where they would hand out samples of the chocolate bar only to men. It was so egregious that city councils in both Liverpool and Birmingham banned Nestle from conducting these events. As for how Thorpe Park relates to this, the park posted a sign right next to the track on Stealth that read, "Stealth, are you man enough?" Thankfully, they didn't restrict the coaster to men only. This ad campaign was eventually discontinued in 2011, but it's still a pretty outrageous piece of confectionery history I just had to talk about here. With the addition of Stealth, Thorpe Park's attendance shot up another 200,000 guests compared to the year before. In 2007, the Tussauds Group merged with Merlin Entertainment. This, however, did nothing to stem the edgy marketing campaigns. In fact, it was full steam ahead. Me personally, I consider 2009 to 2010 to be the Bodily Fluids Era of Thorpe Park. You know the 4 humors of medieval medicine? Blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm? Well, in Thorpe Park's case, these humors could be divided into blood, sweat, vomit, and urine. But before we get to those, let's discuss an infamous 2009 advert that related to other bodily fluids I can't mention without being demonetized. In 2009, Thorpe Park released a commercial officially called Roller Coaster P-Word that rhymes with corn. This ad was, well, just take a look at this. And as if this wasn't wild enough, on YouTube, the ad's metadata had tags like boobs, shag, deep throat, Megan Fox, and Michael Jackson. Now back to the relatively more YouTube-friendly bodily fluids, let's start with blood. In 2009, Thorpe Park introduced its next major coaster, a fully themed Eurofighter model by German manufacturer Gerstlauer. This coaster, believe it or not, was named and themed to one of the most violent mainstream franchises of all time, the Saw movies. The coaster was named Saw the Ride, and it would be a fully themed immersive experience based on the gory horror films.
Hello. So you thought the games were over? They've only just begun.
Saw the Ride at Thorpe Park.
Starting off, the indoor queue takes place inside a warehouse full of traps. One scare features 4 shotguns suspended from the ceiling that fire off compressed air every 90 seconds. There's also a replica of the famous rack trap from Saw 3, as well as several mannequins and a man trapped in barbed wire suspended above guests. Inside the station, you can see Billy the Puppet on his tricycle. After boarding, guests make their way through the dark ride portion of the coaster. Guests maneuver past swinging pendulum blades, dive down towards a pit of spikes, and dodge crossbow syringes, which are actually just compressed air blasts. Finally, you enter the famous bathroom from the first movie. Here, you can see Carrie Elwes' severed foot and a prop cadaver on the floor. This prop has nozzles built into the back, which spray passengers with water as they pass through an inline twist above. The water, of course, is meant to represent blood. The body was originally nude, though they did humorously paint shorts on him in 2024. After exiting the building, guests approach the vertical lift hill, which takes them 100 feet up in the air. This 100-foot lift is followed by a 100-degree beyond vertical drop that takes guests under rotating saw blades. Now, the rest of the layout is more like a standard roller coaster, but it's that first part that really stands out. They managed to not only build a coaster based on a grisly horror movie, but a fully themed one to boot. However, it wasn't enough for Thorpe Park to simply theme a ride to Saw, and they went all out with bizarre promotional stunts. Before the ride even opened, Thorpe Park held an online contest called Ride It First. According to several guest accounts, an affiliated website had a flash game called Disciples of Saw. The goal of the game was to saw through a foot as quickly as possible. The game was actually said to be pretty gnarly despite the crude 3D graphics. Unfortunately though, it appears to be lost media, and no images exist of it. Thankfully though, there are images of the next promotional tactic for Saw the Ride. Shortly after the ride opened in March of 2009, Thorpe Park had publicly hired a man named Rhys Owens to serve as the park's sick collector. For those on this side of the Atlantic, sick is British slang for vomit. Thorpe Park explained that in 2008, there were exactly 619 instances of rides being temporarily shut down due to guests throwing up. They added that approximately 150 liters of vomit had to be cleaned up that year alone. For reference, 150 liters is about 40 gallons. Officials claimed that the Easter holidays were especially bad for guest sickness due to the copious amounts of chocolate people ate that day before getting on the rides. With a horror-themed, high-intensity coaster on the horizon, Thorpe Park Divisional Director Mike Ballas said the position was especially necessary. According to Owens, despite having to wear a nose peg, he considered the position a dream job. He explained that he was a huge roller coaster enthusiast. Owens told the BBC, quote, "If all I have to do is clean up maybe 1 or 2 bits of sick throughout the day, I'm not really fussed. It's a dream for me." But beyond barf, Thorpe Park's marketing also involved sweat. The same year that saw the ride open, Thorpe Park launched its Say No to BO campaign. In August, the UK was going through a pretty serious heat wave. According to Mike Ballas, multiple guests complained of the overwhelming body odor of other guests during these hot spells. As a result, the park decided to ban guests from putting their hands up on days hotter than 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Signs saying "Say No to BO" were placed throughout the park, especially on the extreme level coasters. Staff reportedly handed out free deodorant spray cans to guests who smelled particularly bad. Meanwhile, ride operators would remind passengers to keep their arms down before dispatching. Mike Vallis claimed that in extreme cases, they would move some guests to the back of the train so that, quote, "the whole ride doesn't have to go through a cloud of someone else's BO." A Thorpe Park spokesman denied that this was simply a publicity stunt, telling the BBC, quote, "People may say it's all a publicity stunt, but we take our customer feedback seriously." That said, another spokesperson did admit that the ban was not enforceable, and that at most, guests would just be asked to put on deodorant. This whole campaign was basically a way to show off how intense the park's rides were. Engineer Brendan Walker, whose design practice Ariel collaborated with Thorpe Park, told the media that the sheer intensity of riders' body odor was attributed to how exciting the rides were. Walker explained, quote, "Because rides like Stealth are so scary, people's sweat pores will be working overtime, but there is some truth to what Walker is saying. In hot conditions, sweat is relatively simple, serving to cool the body from the eccrine glands, which are more spread out throughout the skin. In frightening situations, though, the fight-or-flight response activates the apocrine glands. These glands, which are mainly found in the armpits and groin, release a thicker, more protein-rich type of sweat. These proteins are broken down by bacteria on the skin, and this breakdown process creates what is known as body odor. Pretty fascinating science, actually. So now that we've covered blood, vomit, and sweat, let's finish off this era with urine. Saw the Ride was a huge hit, and in 2009, the park's annual attendance hit 2 million people for the first time. To strike while the iron was hot, Thorpe Park planned another Saw-based attraction for 2010. Instead of a ride, though, it would be a walk-through year-round horror maze named Saw Alive. This attraction took guests through some of the most famous scenes from the movies. All the while, they encountered live actors playing the victims and scare actors dressed in pig masks. One notable thing about this maze is that it actually took place on a boat. Originally, it was designed to resemble a steamship and was home to an educational exhibit. It, however, was repurposed to hold the Saw Alive maze. Unfortunately, the maze closed down in 2018 due to safety concerns, supposedly the boat starting to sink. Thorpe Park officials wanted to make the dingy, grisly environment as immersive as possible, so they wanted to find a quote-unquote signature stench. Soon enough, they settled on an idea that involved guest participation. On February 26, 2010, the park held an actual urine contest. For this, competitors were asked to submit urine samples using special deposit booths near Saw the Ride itself. Whoever had the most disgusting smelling urine would win a 500-pound cash prize. They would also have their odor replicated into an artificial scent inside the maze, along with the smell of burnt hair and rotten meat. According to The Independent, the winning stench was chosen by the park's entertainment manager, Laura Sinclair. Sinclair justified the contest to the media, saying, quote, "We want Saw Alive to be as authentic and terrifying as possible to make visitors feel as if they are living in a real-life horror film. To do this, we really need to push the boundaries of what our guests experience from a sensory point of view." Now, I'm not sure if she had to spend an entire day sniffing urine samples, but if I was tasked with something like that, I'd probably quit on the spot. Having braved the horrors of bodily fluids, the park soon braved the horrors of the paranormal as well. In October 2009, Thorpe Park reported that 6 staff members stayed behind after hours on the opening night of the Fright Nights Halloween event. According to the park, the staff members conducted a seance with a Ouija board inside the Saw Ride building. The 6 staff members were reportedly suspended, and officials supposedly blamed the seance for a series of strange occurrences on the coaster. Officials claimed that there were unexplained drops in temperature, flickering lights, and special effects randomly turning on even after being switched off. After finding no technical faults, the park brought in Reverend Lionel Fanthorpe, a priest, entertainer, and former dental technician. One source claimed to see Fanthorpe walking around the park holding a Bible in one hand and a crucifix in the other. Fanthorpe himself stressed how dangerous Ouija boards can be and stated that he would exorcise the coaster if necessary. Again, the park gave no indication that this was a joke to the media, but considering that Fanthorpe is an entertainer and the ride stayed open during this investigation, it's pretty safe to assume it was a tongue-in-cheek marketing stunt. Another one of those stunts would be pulled off in 2011. That year, Thorpe Park planned to open Storm Surge, a spinning rapids ride by waterslide manufacturer Whitewater West. This ride consists of a large, multi-person raft descending a wide waterslide. It had formerly operated at the Cypress Gardens amusement park in Florida, which was acquired by Merlin and later turned into Legoland Florida. This ride model is often criticized for lacking thrills and for not getting riders very wet, if at all. For Thorpe Park, they did make efforts to make the ride more thrilling, such as adding water features and putting Velcro pads on the chute so the rafts would snag onto them and spin more. But before the ride even opened, Thorpe Park officials spread a bizarre story concerning its construction. According to officials, they originally planned to install the attraction in the area of Monk's Walk, a historic footpath that dates all the way back to 666 AD. According to Mike Vallis, strange things started happening during the ground prep. According to The Independent, workers creating the water ride at Thorpe Park in Surrey for the new season said they started noticing ghostly sightings nearby, including what appeared to be a headless monk. There were reports of objects being moved, workers feeling like someone was watching over their shoulders, and a sudden cold feeling being experienced. The article also stated that a paranormal detection agency was called in to conduct an investigation. Apparently, they discovered that the site was home to an ancient burial ground, and the ride's foundations would have been dug in areas where stone coffins were previously excavated. The paranormal investigation also picked up orbs and ghostly images and photos, and a later analysis by a geophysicist picked up signatures similar to a burial ground. All of this supposedly led to officials moving the ride's location next to Colossus to avoid disturbing the spirits or something. Of course, despite this story getting international attention through news sources, it was pretty clear that the ride was always meant to go there. The ride was built on the former site of the Octopus Garden Children's Area, which closed months earlier. All of this was likely meant to drum up interest in an otherwise unremarkable water ride, but hey, you gotta give them props for creativity. The same year as this stunt, another strange event took place at the park. On April 13th of that year, the park held the Extreme Vicar Contest. In it, 16 priests competed against each other, riding as many of the park's thrill rides as they could. Clergy members rode both Saw the Ride and Storm Surge, among other attractions. The contest was also held at Thorpe's sister park Alton Towers, with clergy members riding Oblivion. The winner would conduct a special religious service called Extreme Easter, which would take place at the park. According to OddityCentral.com, this event was set up in response to a decrease in churchgoers in the UK. The idea was that they could encourage more people to come out and worship if they held the service at a theme park. Now, I couldn't find out who won the contest, nor could I find any testimonies of what the Extreme Easter service was like, so if you attended, I'd love to hear more about it. Heading into 2012, Thorpe Park would make yet another huge coaster investment. This coaster, named The Swarm, was a Bolliger and Mabillard wing coaster built around an apocalyptic theme. On this ride, passengers soared through the wreckage of a disaster zone after an alien attack. Now, Thorpe Park was no stranger to edgy or unorthodox marketing campaigns, but some say the promotion for The Swarm crossed the line. Shortly before the ride opened, Thorpe Park announced that something had apparently gone wrong during testing. According to the park, a set of test dummies had their limbs dismembered while on the ride. The supposed culprit was one of the ride's near-miss elements, a partially destroyed church that the train appeared to pass dangerously close to. Photos of the damaged dummies made it seem as though clearance was so tight that the scenery had literally ripped them apart. Of course, that was not what actually happened. The entire incident was staged as a promotional stunt. The damaged dummies were intended to make the Swarm's near-miss elements look even more frightening and reinforce the idea that riders would be narrowly missing them. It was certainly a creative way to promote a new coaster, but arguably, this actually backfired. Back in 2010, park attendance had peaked at about 2.17 million guests, and while it stagnated in 2011 at 2.11 million, it plunged in 2012, going to 1.82 million. Whether the dummy stunt had anything to do with the drop is impossible to say. Unfortunately, the underperformance of the Swarm was a pretty big hit to the park's investment plan. Reportedly, another major coaster was planned for 2015, but this was said to be cancelled. As it turned out, the Swarm would be the last major coaster the park got for over a decade. On the bright side, the opening of Stealth coincided with yet another crazy marketing stunt, this time in regards to merchandise. Now, you may have heard of roller coaster merchandise like shirts and magnets, but what about condoms? Yes, there was a Thorpe Park set of banana gloves. So far as I know, they were sold at the park's various gift shops. They came in 3 coaster-themed varieties. Stealth said, hard, fast, and up in seconds. Colossus said, the ultimate screw. And the Swarm said, the end is coming. Now, there's nothing wrong with promoting safe sex, and Alton Towers did the same with Oblivion. These condoms were orange-flavored, with a box that read the ride's slogan, Don't Look Down. Selling roller coaster-themed condoms at an amusement park is pretty diabolical, in a good way. From this point, though, the park largely pivoted back to targeting families again. This started in 2014 with the installation of Angry Birds Land. Still, the park was far from done with adding edgy attractions, and 2017 would see a rather ambitious one open. That year, a new virtual reality dark ride experience named Derren Brown's Ghost Train would open to the public. Based on illusionist Derren Brown, this ride saw passengers board a railway carriage and get attacked by a demonic entity. The ride itself was largely criticized for its reliability, as well as its long wait times and use of VR. However, before it even opened, it was advertised with a 2016 commercial that was so terrifying it was actually banned. This 15-second ad, which was intended to air during the Christmas season, featured an on-screen prompt telling viewers to count the bunnies. Several white rabbits were seen on snow-covered train tracks. All of a sudden, a terrifying demonic rabbit popped up from the bottom of the screen. The UK's broadcast censorship body Clearcast banned the commercial from airing before 9 p.m. due to scenes of threat or horror, making it unsuitable for young family audiences. Despite the ban though, the ad was a hit on social media, and Thorpe Park themselves wore the ban like a badge of honor. A Thorpe Park spokeswoman said, quote, "Every year guests are demanding bigger, better, and scarier experiences. So in 2017, we are pushing the boundaries and dialing up the horror with Derren Brown's Ghost Train." Not only was there the ad, but the park also had professional models dress up as two creepy Victorian-style dolls and wander around the London Underground to scare people. Another example of guerrilla-style marketing. 2017 also introduced yet another intellectual horror property. This time, it was AMC's The Walking Dead. For that year's Fright Nights event, Thorpe Park introduced two mazes themed to the show. Instead of another urine contest though, the maze was promoted outside of the park via a living billboard. Officials worked with PR agency Taylor Herring on a new kind of advertisement. With creative help from Plunge Creations, a large billboard was rigged to the side of a truck. On the billboard, 5 actors in full zombie makeup sat at a table feasting on what was described in a press release as 50 kilograms of offal and blood. Passers-by were sprayed with fake blood, and the zombies would proceed to roam the streets. Now, some sources suggested that while the blood was fake, the billboard used real animal organs and entrails. Plunge's Creations website described, quote, "fake blood and guts," but I'm not sure if they meant fake blood but real guts, or if both the blood and guts were fake. Sentence structures can be pretty uncertain sometimes. The next year, they followed up the Walking Dead mazes with a new Walking Dead attraction, sort of. What they did was take their old indoor family coaster X and retheme it to Walking Dead The Ride. The queue was heavily themed to the show, featuring post-apocalyptic decor, sound effects, flashing lights, and a pre-show too. Alongside the track, they even put mannequins dressed up as zombies. This retheme was actually pretty cool, and a great way to reuse an old attraction. Now let's fast forward a few years after the pandemic to just recently. In 2024, Thorpe Park finally opened its next major coaster, Hyperia. Built by German manufacturer Mach Rides, this coaster has a height of 236 feet and a top speed of 80 miles per hour. It is the tallest, fastest roller coaster in the entire United Kingdom and has been wildly praised for its airtime and thrilling elements. Originally, the ride was themed to a fictional goddess named Hyperia. However, just this year, the ride's theming took a bizarre turn to product placement. Thorpe Park managed to secure a sponsorship deal with, I'm not kidding, Flip's brand chocolate-covered pretzels. This was yet another Nestle product, and instead of adding just an ad or two outside of the track, the ride was completely taken over by the sponsor. The sign at the entrance now reads Flipzeria. According to RCDB, that is the official name of the ride now. There are also pretzel-shaped cutouts lining the fence, along with advertising posters for the pretzels. The response from fans was largely negative, with people accusing Merlin of being desperate for money. But you know, I do love chocolate-covered pretzels. If you don't love chocolate-covered pretzels, you're either allergic or you're lying. In fact, I think I'm going to rename my channel to Flips Park Crazy. Well, not actually, but you see how jarring that would be? Regardless, the coaster still looks awesome no matter what it's themed to, and we certainly covered a lot of ground today. We literally started with naked passengers and ended with chocolate-covered pretzels. I truly haven't seen anything like this from a park, but I have a feeling there are more crazy marketing stories out there for other places. If you have any ideas for future videos, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And speaking of comments, now it's time for the comment shoutout program. This is where I take 5 random comments from my previous video and read them out. These comments come from my 2027 coasters video. Paul ET4YB says, Bakunawa looks to be the most terrifying coaster yet. I look forward to trying it. Oscar the Clown says, my home park is Great America, and if you look at the gates surrounding the new attraction, you can see very bad AI-generated slop. It makes me laugh every time. Max Wellosta1 says, my best guess for Joker Ride is a Jinma spinning coaster. The spine track looks similar, and Jinma tends to switch track types mid-ride. Agricolatere says, as a Jersey girl, I think the Great Adventure Edition looks great. And CNTO Online says, I just took a trip to Universal Studios and had seen the layout is basically done. You should make a video on it. I would love to see it. Feel free to check out my Patreon in the description for exclusive archived video content.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on social media on Instagram and Facebook, or you can check out my website at themeparkcrazy.com. And I'm on TikTok. This is Theme Park Crazy, and I'll see you all next time.